Western.
Everybody, great to see such a turnout at short notice. The way in which this whole event has come together has been pretty damn strange. Basically, I started reading Glastonbury Romance again on the day that we heard that the thorn had been finally completely removed. Looking, I thought for a particular passage that I thought would maybe sit well with a blog post or a Facebook post or something. And then I thought, well, maybe there's a lecture in this. And I was literally walking along the high street a week ago and I bumped into Dave and said, I think I've got a lecture here. It'd be nice to do it pretty soon if anybody cancels. And it just so happens that someone had cancelled with 1 week to go. So here we are. Quick show of hands. Who's read Glastonbury Romance all the way through out of this audience? Oh, not bad at all. How many people have started it and just gave up? Alright, that's quite a few as well. This is good stuff. You've generally got a sense of Mr. Powys and his sensibilities at the very least. I feel very strongly that Powys deserves to be included in the ranks of the Avalonians, very clearly alongside Dean Fortune, Frederick Blyborn, Wellesley Tudor Pole, and I'd also put Catherine Morwood in there as well. Patrick Benham in his great book does mention Powys, you know, with a kind of sense of him being slightly peripheral. Dean Fortune in Outlaw of the Heart makes a very passing reference to Glastonbury Romance. At the time it was published, there was controversy, there was litigation because a local dignitary felt that a portrayal of a character in there was too close to him. This was news. I can't believe that Dean Fortune ever actually read this book or even looked at it. I'm absolutely sure that if she hadn't done, she would have realised very, very soon that she was in the presence of something extraordinary and immersed herself in it, but there we are. The thing that I think is really interesting about Powys, the element that I feel is worth bringing into our contemporary Glastonbury sensibilities and discourse, is this sense in which a novelistic drama, you know, pervades the life of this town and always has done. And it is actually engaging with it on that level that actually enables us to bring out far deeper nuances and understandings of it than might otherwise be the case. Now, if we look at the life of the likes of Dean Fortune and Frederick Blyborn, we obviously know them for their great works, and you know, Dean Fortune, a lot of love for her novels and so on. But if we study their biographies, we realise that in the background of their work is some kind of great soap opera that's going on. You know, Dean Fortune had what you could call a failed marriage. We understand that this, the extent of this was that there were tremendous rows where plates were being thrown at each other. Can we imagine the authorial voice with which we are familiar from Psychic Self-Defence and Avalon the Heart and Mystical Kabbalah, engaged in some screaming match with her husband throwing plates at the wall? And yet, in terms of how her work developed, there's a pretty good case to be made for saying that the great novels, the ones that we probably all know and love, like The Sea Priestess and Moon Magic, would not have taken the shape that they had done without that kind of background in her life. Frederick Blyborn, you know, there's this kind of mythology, if you like, that he's evicted from his work in Glastonbury Abbey because of the publication of the Gate of Remembrance, where he reveals the details of the psychic archaeology and how he came to his results with the Edgar Chapel. And yet, if we look at Tim Hopkinson Ball's biography, our attention is drawn to, in fact, his failed marriage. The fact that things get pretty damn bad between him and his ex-wife. His ex-wife enters into a series of recriminatory letter writings to just about everybody that he knew and worked with, saying what a wrong it was. This led to a court case in Bristol that was reported in the Central Somerset Gazette in 1922, and it was this that led to him losing his post at the Abbey. They'd been selling copies of the Gate of Remembrance in the Abbey grounds for years before that point. I mean, it wasn't controversial, but it's this element in his life, this what you might call soap opera. And for people that have lived here a while, you know, we may remember all kinds of grand mystical events. We might remember the Avalonian conversions, and we might remember 2012 and various, you know, the visits of various important people and spectacular ceremonies on the tour and so on and so forth. But chances are it's the drama of our everyday lives, of who we've known, what's happened, and all the turbulence that has been a really important factor. And there are archetypal forces, dramas that are part of, you know, the greater, more mysterious life of this town that find their way through what we think of as being the everyday little bits and pieces in people's lives. And this is where Powys really comes into his own for us. And I intend to sing his praises tonight as a supreme, you know, bardic magician. And I believe, you know, I can demonstrate quite clearly through my own story that Glastonbury Romance is a powerfully psychoactive text. But the story I want to tell is pretty damn intense and bad and heavy, and there's some nasty, nasty stuff that goes down. But I will, because it is, I haven't forgotten it's a positive living group, I will throw you a few wholesome elements as we progress that are takeaways that are not just murder and mayhem. So Powys tells us a lot about himself. You know, I first encountered him in 1978 when we called him Wilson's The Occult, and it was obvious to me that he was a grade A weirdo, and I was kind of collecting biographical details of characters such as that at the time, you know. His autobiography was written, or it came out in 1934, so it's more or less directly after Glastonbury Romance, and it is something, you know, with all great writers, when they're producing an autobiography, it's filtered through the weirdness of their psyche, and this is really the case with Powys. But it gives us enough to get a real sense of how the magic works. So he describes himself in this autobiography as a fatally dangerous sort of monster, a satyr monk, a wicked mystic. And he believed that he was, or at least would eventually be, a magician. And what is a magician if not one who converts God's reality into his own reality, God's world into his own world, God's nature into his own nature? And there are accounts of him, of the general type of personality that he had. The writer Louis Wilkinson, who was also quite close to Aleister Crowley, so someone who had an appreciation of unusual individuals, he wrote of what he saw in Powys, of the beauty of transfixing power for those who saw and heard him, full of life, full of beliefs, full of the power to communicate his abundance. Every gesture was extravagantly, highly coloured, fantastical, theatrical, maniacal even, but it all made a tremendous mark. There was a vital force of John's whole identity, and his power, his genius for breaking all bounds and bonds with it. I could and can very well understand anyone thinking of, or indeed worshipping him, as godlike. So that's pretty full-on recommendation. And this overflowing life force was a sign of astonishing inner depths, central to his peculiar psychology, especially in his early years, was a prodigious polymorphous perversity sufficient to provide work for a whole convention of psychoanalysts. He made no attempt to hide this, recording its many forms, you know, in his autobiography. He said, I gave complete rein to so many manias and aberrations that those who knew me best must often have wondered how far in the direction of a really unbalanced mind I was destined to go. He was a man who happily accepted immense paradoxes in his nature, exploring them for the sake of his art, develop an intense sense of the simultaneity of good and evil in the divine. So sadistic thoughts overwhelmed him, and yet he felt that vivisection was the very embodiment of evil, and became a vegetarian on the basis of that. He would imagine the most beautiful images in his mind, but they would almost immediately distort into hideous forms. He found things that were repulsive to most people, in some way humorous, and this just continued until it's almost a kind of shamanic illness in certain respects. Hallucinations develop. All through his life, he's plagued by recurring stomach ulcers and bouts of bad health and terrible constipation. But he lives to be 91, and he's still writing these extraordinary books in his 80s. Early on in his life, he goes through a phase of compulsive hand washing. He avoids touching door handles. His whole sense of touch just completely warps out. Wouldn't touch anything made of cotton. Inordinately distressing. Linen sheets, absolutely repulsive. And yet he later makes an all-encompassing sensuality his major mode of being, cultivating it as a magical, mystical technique. A power, as he said, of rousing a peculiar exaltation in yourself as you confront the inanimate. An exaltation which is really a cosmic eroticism. And this would often start for him with the contemplation of some natural object. He felt that from every plant, from every stone, there emanates a presence, and his apparently separate identity would dissolve, so that his awareness seemed to blend with whatever he saw. I could become inanimate objects. I could feel myself into the lonely identity of a pier post, of a tree stump, of a monolith in a stone circle. And when I did this, I looked like this post, this stump, this stone. Now, initially, everything feminine freaks him out. I mean, this is quite extraordinary. Trees and flowers with female organs were disgusting. Birdsong was irredeemably tainted with the possibility of some of the choir being female. He developed a terror of growing breasts. And in the grip of this mania around sex and femininity, he actually gets married. And when this thought turned to the fact that children are the result of sexual union, he became almost physically ill. And such was his fear of sex with a virgin that his poor wife was forced to endure surgical deflowering to facilitate their physical union. Now, any feminists who feel that she should have told him to fuck right off, quite obviously got a point. And in his autobiography, on the basis of some really unconvincing reasoning, he never mentions any woman, not his mother, not his wife, no one. And yet, this total goddamn crank had what was undoubtedly, this is him speaking in his autobiography, a strong erotic desire to embrace the magical loveliness of the world, just as if that vast, mysterious presence was a feminine being. You know, he's searching for the finding of the eternal feminine in matter itself. And later in his life, he would pray every single day to the ancient goddesses Demeter and Cybele for the sake of the health and well-being of his brothers and of the destitute of London and New York. The legendary dancer Isadora Duncan actually came to his apartment and danced for him. She sent him multitudinous red roses, and he wrote that it was as though Demeter herself, the Mater Dolorosa of the ancient earth, rose and danced for him. So the extreme end of his boundaryless, power-charged psyche seemed to exist in a semi-magical paranormal zone. You know, one occasion he apparently bilocated. You know, he predicted to a friend, later on I'm going to appear to you. And in fact, after he'd physically departed, hours later he did. This person saw him, clearly recognisable, weirdly glowing white. And he refused to discuss how the hell he'd done. Now, Colin Wilson speculated that it was because he literally didn't know. And I kind of think that there's something in there. And apparently people who angered him suffered misfortune so regularly that he entered into this discipline of praying for his enemies in an attempt to restrain this function which was beyond his conscious control, some kind of cursing power. So for nearly 30 years, Powys, having been brought up in a huge family in this area, his father was vicar of Montacute for decades. He ended up on the other side of the pond lecturing in the United States on literature. You know, rather than addressing academic audiences, he gigged to an interested general public to set forth for great literature. And by all accounts, you know, these were amazing performances. And as a measure of what completely different culture we've got then, can you believe that he and Bertrand Russell debated the sanctity of marriage at a huge public gig at the Hollywood Bowl? And it was filmed, and we've actually got a little fraction of where they're kind of just making a few film tests of Powys speaking. And he describes his performances in general as a sort of focusing through one single twisting, leaping, shuffling, skipping, bowing and scraping human figure of some special comic tragic vein in the planetary consciousness. And he felt that the old druidic spirit, the spirit of Taliesin of the many incarnations, took possession of me, and that the subsequent druidic hypnotism of speech might produce a magic message from the gods of the old world to the marketplace of the new. Something it was from those far-off sacred hills, from Glastonbury Tor, from Cadbury Camp. And his later long-term partner, Phyllis Plater, she first saw him at one of these legendary events. And apparently he spoke with such intensity on the subject of Dostoevsky that two of the audience fainted. You know, I would love to see the film footage of that. But this little fragment that we've got, it is absolutely extraordinary. The person that he reminds me the most of is actually John Lydon. It's remarkable. He won't keep still. There's only a few minutes of it. It's like this. He's just talking. If only we had more of it. But yeah, this person is embodying, you know, a whole textbook of psychological emotional dysfunction, and somehow or another he comes out the other side of it, and he does come to embrace the divine feminine. And in a very late work, The Brazen Head, written when he's actually in his 80s, there's a character who sees the full moon rising in the sky and utters a kind of spontaneous invocation and prayer to the goddess. Now, I felt that it'd be interesting, although it's a male character, especially here in Glastonbury, to appreciate Powys, this invocation recited in a female voice. Because we've got someone who's quite adept at that to hand.
Thank you. O great goddess, grant us, we beseech thee, an influence, a virtue, a secret, a touch, a mystery, from the heart of that which continueth forever. Heal us, therefore, O goddess, of the hurts and wounds in our souls that ache and bleed today because of the false doctrines about gods and men that have been inflicted upon us. False doctrines about all things in heaven and earth. Have they not taken on themselves, these priests of pain, these ministers of blood, to invent signs and tokens and symbols and sacraments out of privation and deprivation, out of suppression and frustration, out of denial and negotiation? Have they not thus defied the revelations made by thy blessed mystery, and turning to nothing but the secret of thy holy rapture, of thy sacred madness, of thy entranced, thy transporting ecstasy? Make them give us back the pulse of our life, great goddess. Give us back the beat of our heart. Give us back the dance of our blood.
Glastonbury Romance. Powys has left us quite a bit of detail, especially in an introduction that he wrote to later editions of what his intention was with this massive novel. He wanted to portray the effect of a particular legend, a special myth, a unique tradition, from the remotest past in human history upon a particular spot on the surface of the planet, together with its crowd of inhabitants of every age and every type of character. And that special myth is essentially the book's heroine, the Grail. Its hero is the life poured into the Grail. Its message is that no one receptacle of life and no one fountain of life poured into that receptacle can contain or explain what the world offers us. So Powys basically decides to make the landscape, the history and mythology of Glastonbury a character in his novel of equal status to the human characters, if you like. The different elements can't be separated. This landscape, history and mythology, they constitute an elusive something that can interact with a person as strongly as any human character, stirring passion, idealism, madness, asceticism, horror, mysticism, eroticism, in all possible combinations. So what you've got, as those of you that have read it or dipped in will know, is a huge multi-dimensional, organismic tapestry seen from what Colin Wilson called the God's eye point of view. And Powys states, there are no less than 6 major love affairs, 1 murder, 3 births, 2 deaths, and 1 raising from the dead, amongst the 40 different characters that fill 1,000 pages. There's an all-pervading, Wordsworthian, pantheistic nature mysticism that depicts the landscape, weather, trees, animals, insects, ghosts, dreams, thoughts, the events of the past as equally significant to the actions of its human characters, who play out a drama that, in my opinion, is more erotic, but although less explicit than D.H. Lawrence, and as rustic and fatalistic as Thomas Hardy. A drama conforming to a deep, subtle script of Grail mythology that most of its protagonists are actually unaware of. So one very interesting thing right from the word go with Powys is that he puts Glastonbury in the context of being a global sacred site. And I think he might be the earliest example of this. I don't think even, the unfortunate talks about Atlantis and Avalon. But Powys says it's a reservoir of world magic. Jerusalem, Rome, Mecca, Larsa, and of these, Glastonbury has the largest residue of unused power. And in this novel, more so than any of his other works, quite clearly more so, the whole edifice is built on a Gnostic, heretical conception of the divine that's obviously ruled from the paradoxical tensions in his own psyche. So he states that there is no consciousness, whether of demiurge, demon, angel, elf, elemental, planetary spirit, demigod, wraith, phantasm, sun, moon, earth or star, which is not composed of both good and evil. Both the 2 great forces pouring forth from the double-natured first cause possess the energy of sex. One is creative, the other destructive. One is good, the other evil. One loves, the other hates. But through both of them pours forth the magnetic energy that moves and disturbs the lethargy of matter. Both of them have abysmal levels in their being that transcend all that we at present know of the duality of life and death. And throughout the work you'll find various characters who essentially offer up prayers. And Powys will tell you where their prayers have reached to. That maybe, through no fault of their own, it's reached the evil part of the first cause rather than the good part. Or it's only got so far up a hierarchy of, emanations and entities and different forces that are responsible for the playing out of destiny. And one of the characters says, what none of you people in Glastonbury seem to understand is that the place is charged and soaked with a desperate, invisible struggle. Now, the main part of the drama of the narrative is a conflict between two characters, John Geard and Philip Crowe. Now, John Geard, as a former preacher in Montague, might owe a little bit to Powys' father, but probably not much. He's quite a kind of simple character, but he has this really powerful, phonic kind of force about him, and he seems to be a genuine miracle worker, a thaumaturge, and he attempts to create a cult of the blood of Christ at the Chalice Well, and he's got this endless kind of almost mantric utterance, blood of Christ, that he keeps on intoning. And yet at the same time, there is something unquestionably Merlin-like about him. And he has this kind of reverence for Merlin, and there are references to Merlin having disappeared on Chalice Hill and inscriptions that are somehow discovered and so on and so forth. But he's got this far more dark, deep and pagan undercurrent to the depths of his personality. Now, Philip Crowe is an industrialist, and he's initially introduced as somebody who's the owner of Wearyall, and he's put all these lights inside it, and he's got factories, and he's a despiser of the legends of Glastonbury, and he wants basically to establish a whole modern workforce in Glastonbury and fully industrialise it. And yet there is at one point an episode where he's having an affair with a young woman who's named Persephone, and he takes her on a boat into the underworld of Wearyall and takes her through this subterranean region, which is an obvious indication that he's also carrying certain archetypal aspects about with him that he has no consciousness of it at all, because his personality type is the exact opposite. But this is just an example of how Powys handles his narrative and shows how these things are working through people's psyches without them even necessarily being conscious of it. Now, one of the things that is described by Powys as part of how this drama plays out was something that made me go back into Glastonbury Romance a few weeks ago. Literally the day that I heard that the Thorn had been completely taken down, I thought there is a whole section in this novel concerning the various forces in people's psyche that at night, under cover of dreams, there is a conflict played out between those who are going out to kill the Grail and those who are going out to somehow keep it and nourish it. And I thought to myself, this could be interesting. I want to find this again, have another look at it. Maybe we'll get a blog post out of it, etc. Maybe we'll get another lecture out of it. Good job I've got a lot of stamina for this, because it's 800 pages in before you get to this bit. First of all, my attention was drawn to the fact that here and there Powys put some very specific dates in. He anchors his narrative all the way around the entire year, and he talks about the night of December the 10th. Now, it wasn't quite the 10th, but back in 2010, I think it was from the 8th through to the 9th was when the Thorn was first taken down. All the enemies, I'm going to do some quite extensive quoting here, but I hope you'll agree it's going to be worth it. All the enemies of the great legend happened that night of December the 10th to be going to sleep about the same time. Glastonbury indeed, under its windy, moonless winter sky, was like many another town that night in the turbulent history of our earth. It was subject to the psychic tearing down and building up of the most violently diverse energies. But all of these legend destroyers were of the same sex. Not one single feminine wish was lifted up from the bed of sleeping hostility to the immemorial tradition, but from the bed of Red and the bed of Dave and the bed of Paul Trent and the bed of Mr. Barter and the bed of Lloyd Beer and the beds of Bank Cashier Stilly, Gardner Weatherwax and Will Zoyd, and finally from the bed in Northlow Street of John Crow, there rose up, along with the destructive willpower of Philip, a cumulative malediction against the legend. The history of any ancient town is as much the history of its inhabitants' nightly pillows as of any practical activity that they perform by day. Floating on its softly upheaving sea surface of feminine breasts, the island city of mystery gathered itself together to resist this wedge of rational invasion. Backward and forward, for 5,000 years, the great psychic pendulum has swung between belief in the Glastonbury legend and disbelief. It is curious to think of the pertinacity of the attacks upon this thing and how, like a vapour dispersed by a wind that refashions itself again the moment the wind departs, the moss-grown towers and moonlit ramparts of its imperishable enchantment survive and again survive. When the king murdered the last abbot of this place, he was only doing what Philip and Barbara and Red and Dave and Paul Trent and John would like to do to the indestructible mystery today. In the most ancient times, the same fury of the forces of reason must have swept across Glastonbury, only to be followed by the same eternal reaction when the forces of mystery returned. The psychic history of a place like Glastonbury is not an easy thing to write down in set terms. For not only does chance play an enormous part of it, but there are many forces at work for which human language has at present no fit terms. This particular night of the 10th of December was in reality one of the great turning points in the life of Glastonbury. But the issue of the struggle that went on tonight would evade all but supernatural narration, however one might struggle to body it forth. And we now, from one of the central characters, John Crow, who's a member of the industrialist Philip Crow's family, but in the daytime is very much opposed to him and hates him so much that he's prepared to work for this mystic, John Geard. And yet, at night, out of John Crow's head, after he'd relaxed to sleep that night, from his lascivious claspings of Mary's marbly limbs, there leapt up into the darkness the spiritual form of all the suppressed maliciousness from which he had been suffering in his service of John Geard. This spiritual form was a shape, a presence, an entity. It was in fact the essential soul of John Crow, for the vital consciousness of his sleeping body was but a vague, weak diffusion of electric force. What else could the soul of John Crow do when released in sleep from his life of psychic slavery, but join with an exultant rebound all those other wandering spirits who were engaged in killing the Grail? It was really a monstrous thing now that John and Philip should dislike one another so heartily during the daylight hours, but at night rush off together to join in killing the Grail. The Grail could not actually be killed, for the thing is a morsel of the absolute and a broken off fragment of the first cause. It could not, of course, be killed literally, not in the sense of being annihilated, but it could be struck at and outraged in a way that was a real injury. Real enough, anyhow, to stir up a very ambiguous feeling in the trapped nerves of John Crow. After all, there was an unknown element in the composition of this broken off piece of its own substance at the first course, flung down upon this spot. there was also something of the thought stuff of the same ultimate being in the personality of all its living creatures. Thus, in the psychic war that was going on above the three hills of Glastonbury, the absolute was, in a manner of speaking, pitted against the absolute. This joining of Philip and John in their orgy of Grail killing meant no more than if anyone could have looked down that night upon the mental arena of Glastonbury, he would have seen a powerful group of masculine consciousnesses bent upon completing the work of the bestial King Henry and destroying once and for all traces of this Cymric superstition. Now, Powys portrays a lot of these old legends in a way that basically they have been anchored in this geographical vicinity, and that there came a point with the coming of the Saxons when the Celtic people retreated to Wales, that literally the very dreams that created the shrines of Glastonbury, the mythology of Glastonbury, were kind of blown away, and on certain occasions, on strange nights such as this 10th of December, when the weather and the winds are blowing and the storms are blowing, there is an ebbing and flowing where these dreams kind of return again. And the people that are the descendants of the original inhabitants feel all of this and join in on this kind of nightscape. And it's interesting, that Powys says, he refers to this night as the 10th of September, a date that always every year, only none but the witch wives of Bovetown and Paradise knew about this, was a significant date for Glastonbury. And what came back upon this terrific wind blowing up out of the Western Sea and the Western Isles were the dreams of the conquered, those disordered, extravagant, law-breaking dreams out of which the shrines of Glastonbury had originally been built. And, it's a long chapter. It's called Nature Seems Dead. Nature Seems Dead, and there's so much in it, which I really recommend, you engage with again if you find this of interest. But Powys actually discusses what some of these characters are dreaming. And as an example of just how extraordinary his mind is, this character Persephone, who I've mentioned before, Persephone dreamed that green leaves were growing out of her feet and out of her shoulders, and that she was standing stark naked in the centre of a group of silver-barked birch trees who were all like herself, slim naked girls with green leaves growing out of their heads and green leaves growing out of their feet. Now at that time, the Holy Thorn, there wasn't a thorn on the hill, the one that we lament was planted in the 1950s, but the legend was there, and there were some fragments, bits of bush and so on, that people wondered if this was a descendant of the thorn. Near this group where Persephone was standing, there grew that nameless tree from the top of Wearyall Hill, which Mary had called by one name, Mr. Evans by another, and Macbeth by another. And Persephone suddenly saw all the girls turn towards this tree and, lifting up their hands, begin chanting something to it. And this particular night, this tumultuous night of the 10th of December, is also significant in the novel because later on, and remember we're 800 pages in, we're introduced for the first time to a character who becomes one of the most important in the novel by virtue of the fact that he is the perpetrator of a horrible murder. Now, Powys in Glastonbury Romance is not unlike James Joyce in Ulysses. He is tremendously life-affirming. There are characters who seem on the surface to have qualities about them that we're not going to like. Philip Crowe is a good example, but there comes a point where there are aspects of his personality that are revealed that we can like, we can appreciate. People that are tortured by the weirdest, inner demons of sadism and craziness. Somehow or another, we're still invited to be sympathetic towards them. But on this particular night, after we've had this recounting of all this extraordinary drama that's playing out in the dreamscape of Glastonbury, we're introduced to this character, Finn Toller, and he is just undoubtedly a Roman. There is no redeeming feature to him whatsoever, and he is roped in by a character called Macbeth, who is very important to the plot device as well, and she's an example of how Powys weaves in this weird Grail mythology in a way that is not heavy-handed and obvious, but it's there, because she's like the lonely damsel, she's like the Grail messenger, she's completely bald, and she's absolutely crazy, but she moves the action around in certain ways, and she has conceived a burning hatred of the the wife of one of the central characters, John Crow, because she is in love with him. And up in Glastonbury, up in the tower, up in St Michael's Tower, up on the tour, on the night of all of this, she pretty much does this kind of weird-ass voodoo curse where she fashions a candle in the form of this woman that she wants to die and squashes it and tries to portray, try and force Finn Toller into agreeing to murder this character. Now, the whole thing goes wrong in the end, but this is the seeds of the great narrative denouement. And this has all occurred on this same night, where the forces that seek to murder the Grail are kind of balancing out against, you know, the underconsciousness of the archaic forces and the divine feminine that are somehow ranged against it. And the way the novel works out, in the end, there is a murder that occurs on Glastonbury Tour where somebody's basically hit round the head with an iron bar, and then there's a giant flood. And this has been suggested that it's part of the influence of Powys' part of Phyllis Plater. The final section of the book comes very much back round to the divine feminine again. If you haven't ever read the book, if you've never even dipped into it, if you see a copy of it, read the first page and a half, read the last couple of pages. The whole thing isn't like that. It's enough for you to get a sense that you're in the presence of an extraordinary mind. And in these final 2 pages, you get this kind of evocation again of the divine feminine. Ages before any saint or saviour of our present faith appeared in Glastonbury, the earth goddess had a cauldron of the food of life safely guarded in our island of the west. Out of the timeless, she came down into time. Out of the unnamed, she came down into our human symbols. Through all the stammerings of strange tongues and murmurings of obscure invocations, she still upholds her cause, the cause of the unseen against the seen, of the weak against the strong, of that which is not and yet is, against that which is and yet is not. The divine feminine moves through the generations from one twilight to another, and have her long journeying from cult to cult, from shrine to shrine, from revelation to revelation. There is no end. She brings the breath of what is beyond life and beyond death, and none but such a covenanted as her own discern her comings and her goings. And Powys notes, evermore she rises again, moving from the mists of dawn to the mists of twilight, passing through the noonday like the shadow of an eclipse, and through the midnight like an unblown trumpet, until she finds the land that has called her, and the people whose hearts she alone can fill. Now this is decades before, you know, Geoffrey Ashe or Kathy Jones have any great visions of the goddess in Glastonbury. And although Dion Fortune at the same time is associating Morgan with this area and is bringing forth the archetype of the priestess, in my opinion there's nothing in any of her work that quite compares with this in terms of it directly linking to Glastonbury, So this is Glastonbury Romance. Astonishing thing. And I first became aware of it, you know, the power of it. It's a great work of literature. It should be absolutely obvious to anybody that looks at it that it's an astonishing work of literature. Yeah, it's very eccentric in its form, and you've got to have a bit of an appetite, you know, to dive into it and to complete the thing. But we've heard that Powys has this sense of that he wants to be a magician, that he thinks of himself in certain respects before he even really begins his novel writing as some kind of Taliesin figure, that he wants to bring about this kind of druidic magic and this message from the old sacred hills. So the measure of that, you know, we read some of Dion Fortune's novels and we can get into them ourselves, we can interact with them, we can have things start happening. For people that know my book Out of Guise, I've certainly got a result out of the Sea Priestess novel and so on. In what way is Glastonbury Romance potentially psychoactive? You know, this is where, you know, my personal part of this presentation begins. I first read it back in the summer of 1981, during a time of great turbulence in my life, and then again in 1989, when I was starting to really immerse myself fully in the Glastonbury mythos and history. I'd met Andrew Collins, I was involved in psychic questing, and when I did, in June 1990, the great Glastonbury Zodiac Vision Quest I've written about in Avalonian Eon, the sensibilities of Powys were very much with me and informed my appreciation of what was happening. And when I started to write Avalonian Eon, I was faced with the problem, well, I really want to tremendously champion Powys in this, but how am I going to do it? Where am I going to first introduce it? Am I going to write about it in 1981 or 89? What am I going to do? So I thought, I'm just going to trust this thing, because it's a creative writing process and I'm writing about psychoactive material, let's just see what happens. I realised, you know, the daunting thing, I was probably going to have to read the whole thing again, and I was probably going to have to make detailed notes on it, and like, that's, you know, I need to know that this is the right time. So I was a couple of years into the writing process, and I still hadn't got anywhere near what I was going to do with Powys. And at that point, I was working as the manager of the Speaking Tree warehouse down at the Drill Hall. And on December the 12th, 2002, we had a folded up plastic box that had come from Courtyard Books. And face down in the bottom of it was a postcard. And when I picked up the postcard, it was actually a photograph of John Cowper Powys. It was from the National Portrait Gallery. The image that has been used in the promotion of this lecture, it was that one. And I thought, wow, I've never ever seen anything like this before. And years later, I gave a presentation to the Poets Society. Nobody there had ever seen anything like it either, so it was definitely an unusual thing. And I thought, I think, you know, it's game on now. So I took this postcard home and I put it by my computer screen and just started to write a few tiny little bits and pieces. Now, I wasn't going to go into the full weirdness of all the things that were going on around then. I've told some of these stories before, but things that actually happened earlier on the day have made me feel that it's worth expounding this a bit further. Andrew Collins quite often comes to Glastonbury on New Year's Eve, you know, and we'll do some whatever on New Year's Day. And he contacted me and he said, look, I've managed to secure a job lot of really unusual items that were originally created by an artist called Graham Fenn Edwards, who had at one point been living in a house in Whitby where Bram Stoker had written some of Dracula. And included amongst this is a figurine of the Gnostic god Abraxas. You know, it's about nearly a foot tall, it's pretty full on, dude with a chicken's head and a big stonking stiffy, you know. What can we do with it around Glastonbury? And I thought, okay. I was fascinated by the stories surrounding one of the medieval abbots of Glastonbury Abbey, Sefrid Polotian. He was abbot between 1120 and 1125. Didn't do an awful lot, ended up in Chichester, got deposed for sodomy, all the usual sort of medieval malarkey. But I supposedly dug him up in the 60s, and he's wearing an Abraxas ring. Now, I fully understand, I know that this is now considered dubious. I know it's considered that the guy they dug up in the 60s wasn't Polotian, but it kind of just had this sense of heresy and Abraxas wafting about in Glastonbury Abbey. I thought, I like this. I was particularly taken by Jung's Seven Sermons to the Dead, the mediumistic channel text that he received in 1916, which he's all about Abraxas, and he wrote under the name of Basilides. Most people didn't even know about it during his lifetime. I said, look, I know what we'll do. We'll go to Glastonbury Abbey on New Year's Day and we'll put this statue of Abraxas on the altar down in the Mary Chapel, Joseph Chapel, and I will read some of the words of Seven Sermons to the Dead out loud. And like, you know, it's just pretty full on, man. You know, some people could get a bit upset about that. Dude with a chicken head and a big stiffy on an altar, you could consider it to be blasphemy, I would define it as heresy, but if some little old lady walks in and sees that, you know, things get a bit heated. So we're taking a risk, but at the same time I felt that if this is a Roman, if we're really on a Roman here, there are so many options for something to just come in and stop us. Let's see what happens. So we did, you know, we put this thing on the altar, and I read out a little bit from Seven Sermons of the Dead. Abraxas is undefinable life itself, which is the mother of good and evil. He's the brightest light of day and the deepest night of madness. He is both the radiance and the dark shadow of man. Abraxas generates truth and falsehood, good and evil, light and darkness within the same word and in the same deed. Therefore, Abraxas is truly the terrible one. He's the monster of the underworld, the octopus with 1,000 tentacles. He's the twistings of winged serpents of madness. To fear him is wisdom. Not to resist him means liberation. So this in itself was a pretty full-on start to year, and 2 days later I started reading Glastonbury Romance. You know, and remember, I've already quoted this, I won't quote the whole thing again. There's no consciousness, whether of demiurge, demon, angel, elf, elemental, etc., which is not composed of both good and evil. This cosmology that works its way all the way through Glastonbury Romance is not at all dissimilar to how Jung portrays Abraxas. As we move into this thing, you know, I've got my picture of Powys by my computer screen. There was about half a dozen copies of Glastonbury Romance in that warehouse at the time. Get a phone call from one of our suppliers. We've got 800 copies of Glastonbury Romance. Do you want them? Now, Gareth Mills didn't have all of them, but within barely a fortnight, I think it was 400 or 500 copies of Glastonbury Romance had just come in the door. I thought, well, you know, I'm obviously setting something off here. This is enough to keep it going. On the 3rd of February, which is a month after I've started reading it, I discovered that Jung had come to Glastonbury. Now, I've been into Jung a long time, since 1978. You know, I got pretty heavily into him, read Psychology and Alchemy and Eon and the works, man. Read big-ass biographies of him. I thought I knew all about him. I sure as shit didn't know that he ever came out. And the information that gradually came out, he came out with his wife in 1939 over the Easter weekend. And there's a place called Cowper Powys, which is now a block of flats that was an inn that's directly to the left of the Catholic Church. And they stayed in there, and he was brought in by a guy who was generally called Peter Baines, but his proper name was Heston Baines. Now, you know, there's no way that he didn't come over the Abbey, there's no way that he didn't go down in the Mary Chapel. His wife Emma wrote a whole book about the Grail, and during that period of time he'd taken to wearing a Gnostic gem, you know, essentially an Abraxas gem. There are photos of him that you see where he's kind of sitting there like that and you can see this ring. Even more crazy is the fact that although a version of Seven Sermons associated with Jung doesn't appear until, he doesn't really talk about it until Memories, Dreams, Reflections, right at the end of his life, there was an English version of it that was published by Watkins in 1925 and was just attributed to Basilides. It was not mentioned that it was Jung. And the guy that translated it into English was Heston Baines. So I've literally, you know, all of this has come at me within no time at all. I go down into the Abbey and recite Jung's Seven Sermons to the Dead with Abraxas, and this comes galloping towards me while I'm reading Glastonbury Romance. You know, so obviously I'm pretty powered up by this. And I had the opportunity to go to Germany to see the Indian Holy Woman, Mother Mary, who some of you will know about. I won't go too much into that other than the fact that I always get a major blast out of her, and I took a copy of Glastonbury Romance with me, and I was able to read like hundreds of pages of it each day at the same time as I'm getting, you know, full Darshan power. So when I came back, I finished it on February the 21st, I was exhilarated by it. I was absolutely exhilarated to the max by everything that had happened. This whole thing with Jung and Abraxas, and I started writing about my Glastonbury Zodiac quest in 1990 and bringing in the sensibilities of Powys. And I was so exhilarated with it that an absolutely crazy ass idea came to me, because the narrative of the novel starts at noon on the 5th of March. And I thought, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to start reading it again on the 5th of March at noon, because I was working in the warehouse and I could kind of control my lunch break to that extent. And so I did, you know, on the 5th of March, I started reading it at noon in the warehouse, and within an hour I've been invited to go to a function that was going to be happening in the courtyard of the Glastonbury experience that very night, which was to commemorate 25 years of the courtyard, you know, set up by Helena Copian and so on. And there were going to be people that were Glastonbury veterans were going to be there, and a few people were going to be talking and so forth. I'd done a lot of lectures in the courtyard in the 90s, so I was invited along. And something made me take my postcard of Cowper Powys with me. And I deliberately sat at the back of the room, and I just watched everyone come in, and I thought, this is Glastonbury Romance 2003. This is playing out in front of me like it's some kind of novel, that these are all the players in this novel. What the hell's going to happen? You know, this novel climaxes with a horrible murder and a flood. Oh my God. You know, but I watched it and I felt very, very clearly that something required someone of my very peculiar temperament to actually be carrying that awareness and that idea at that moment, that it was somehow necessary. Powys talks about the invisible watchers of the Glastonbury Aquarium, you know, absolutely inscrutable, you know, movers of the chess pieces. Now, it's not to say we haven't got any free will or anything like that, but there is a very strange fatality involved in all of this. So I watched this, and, you know, I thought, wow, what happens now? Having polled through it, I then read the autobiography from May through to July. I was just getting more and more and more pumped up on Powys. We get into September, this is September 2003, the first, I don't know, 10 days or so of September, it was clear to me and to other people that I was talking to, all is not well. There's something not right here in town. You know, how I understood it, we all come to this in different ways. Some people that are very psychic, they have nightmares and see visions and whatever. My thing was I watched really full-on horror movies, 4 days on the trot. You know, real gory, nasty things. I thought, what the hell am I doing? What the hell am I doing? And then, you know, then the truth comes out. There was a guy in town during that period of time called James McFarlane. He had at one point been the manager of Courtyard Books for quite some time. He moved on, but he had been. And he was known to a lot of us. You know, I knew him reasonably well for years. And he was a hard partier, you know, no question about that. A real sex and drugs and rock and roll kind of guy. Did a lot of drugs. Had a mate called Keith Newman, and they got into some right old states together. Often used to have rows and stuff like this. On the night of the 31st of August, they'd been at James's flat in Beer Lane, and they'd had some totally ridiculous row about, I think Noonan wanted a roll up and James had said, no, buy your own. And he'd come out of the kitchen, I think they were coked up or whatever, and he'd got a knife in his hand. And Noonan took the knife off James and stabbed him multiple times, killing him. And he couldn't deal with this, so he left the body, put the body on the bed, and he would come into town, hang out down the pub with his mates, whatever, have a few beers, then he would go back to the flat and sit with this gradually decomposing corpse. Now, in the end, you know, a few weeks later, the sheer stench of it attracts the place, and the people downstairs have the absolute, utter freaking horror of maggots coming down through the light fitting. And when this was reported in the Sun newspaper, it was referred to as the maggot killing. And this was obviously like a humongous event in the life of the town. And I thought, shit, man, is that it? You know, is that Glastonbury Romance 2003? Is that what all of this was leading me towards? There was nobody else in the whole town had a mindset like that around this. I was quite clear that I was the only person thinking like that. So it needed a little bit more. That was strong stuff, but it needed a little bit more to kind of convince me. So the year goes on. You know, I went down to Lyme Regis just before Christmas to see a gig by the band Go Moon. Some of you probably remember Hindu bardians and so on. You're not necessarily going to expect it's going to be a Powys occasion, but there was a bookshop at the bottom of the high street, whole section of Powys. Oh my goodness, what's this? It's an autographed first edition of the autobiography. You know, my girlfriend at the time bought it for me as a Christmas present. Whoa. You know, I've got John Cowper Powys' autobiography, actually autographed. You know, this is just increasing in intensity. And it was this that made me engage in the completely bonkers third reading of Glastonbury Romance in a 12-month period. Just before Christmas I started it. So it was great to be reading it on Christmas Day. That was a real treat. And I discovered the existence of the Powys Society in the early part of 2004. Joined up with them, got a load of videos, fantastic presentation. Ian Sinclair talking about John Cowper Powys as the grandfather of psychogeography. I was nectar and ambrosia, man, for me to watch a presentation like that. I'm really giving it plenty, you know. And then on Valentine's Day, February the 14th, I go into Courtyard Books. Oh man, what's this? It's a first UK edition of Glastonbury Romance with the cover completely intact. It's freaking pristine, man. And again, you know, my girlfriend buys it for me Valentine's Day. Glastonbury Romance. Oh. So this was just getting ridiculous. You know, is it just going to go on forever? You know, am I just locked into this thing for the rest of my life? March the 5th was in sight, and I thought, oh, come on, just finish this flipping thing on March the 5th and just leave it, man. That would do. I was a few hundred pages adrift, but I was in the Speaking Tree warehouse on the morning of March the 5th, and this is no word of a lie. I had the chapter, the Iron Bar, open. I'd started reading that. That is the chapter that the murder is depicted in. Totally unexpectedly, a woman that used to work for the org came in and said, I've just been in Wells Courthouse this morning. Noonan's just been sent down to prison. Now, I didn't know anything about this. I didn't know that he was in court that morning. Literally, you know, the guy that has perpetrated this murder that I had linked in with Glastonbury Romance 2003 is literally sent down on the flipping 5th of March. Now, I trust you'll agree that was enough for me to think, all right, Paul, I think you were being led to some valid understanding. Quite of what, quite how this works and what the hell it is another thing altogether, but for heaven's sake, that was it, wasn't it? So I galloped through it. I read hundreds of pages of it that day. Finished, done, all right, that's it. You know, 3 readings within 12 months. That is absolutely bonkers. Now, okay, I said, you know, positive living group, we're not just going to have murder and mayhem. Let's, for people that haven't read it, it's like maybe thinking, what the hell's the encouragement to read this shit, man, if this is what starts happening? So is there something a bit more wholesome in there? Well, 10 years later, 2013, I'm living in Beer Lane in an old house just opposite the Abbey Barn. And there's a Mother Mira touch again because I'm getting ready to go out to see her in Germany. And that basically meant, in terms of like a relaxed afternoon of getting ready, at the point where I walk out the front door to put a suitcase in the back of the car appears to be random. But as I do so, there's an old woman over the road who says, Cooey, I was born in the house. And I thought, come over. I start within moments of talking to her. Come in. Oh my God, come in. She'd been born in this house in 1944, and she started telling a whole story that was like some kind of forgotten section out of Glastonbury Romance. You know, full of these Powysian characters. There was a guy next door who had his arm amputated after an industrial accident, so this one-armed giant of an old man used to be lumbering about, going back and forth in there. You know, Grandad had been laid out dead on the kitchen table in there during the war when they had air raid sirens. They would hide under this enormous great oak table in the living room. Most dramatic of all, there had been a baby born in the house, that they thought was dead. Now there was a small fireplace that was never used. They wrapped this baby up in a blanket and put it in the fireplace. And it revived. You know, it wasn't dead, it came to life. Now this little fireplace was in my writing room. I wrote some of my books in this room. So from that point on, I'm living in more than one world. I've got that period of time, that history, you know, right there. It's just so flipping vivid. And this woman also said to me, look, there's a bunch of kids that were around Beer Lane, around this end of Beer Lane in the late 20s and early 30s. And they had a get-together in 1982, I think it was, over at the Abbey Barn. And one of them wrote this book, little booklet, where he gathered together all these reminiscences of everybody and wrote about it. It's called Kidney Bean Lane. I used to call it Kidney Bean Lane because so many people grew kidney beans in the front gardens. And she said, well, look, you borrow it if you want. I said, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. But she said, oh, well, sometime I'll put it for you in that box when I'm able to. So it's about 6 weeks later, and when we went out to Germany to Mother Muriel, we booked this without realising she was coming to Britain as well. So, you know, why not see her more than once? Went to see her in August in London. Got back. As we get back, there's the booklet through the letterbox. So I thought, yeah, okay, I know how this works. This is great stuff. So in there, literally the end of Beer Lane I was at, I find out who was, not just who was living in my house, but the ones next door, 2 or 3 down, 2 or 3 up, who they were, what jobs they did, and also there's a whole thing about these kids. Okay, there was a whole gaggle of kids that used to play around there because there was no traffic and the Abbey Barn was a farm and they used to go back and forth. And this guy had actually compiled the list of all these little real simple games that they used to play and all this little Somerset dialect that they used to have. And there was one really evocative thing about how at night when it was twilight there was this old lamppost. It was probably in the same place that there was a new lamppost at that time. They would sit by this lamppost in the twilight as bats were flying about above them and they would be playing these games. You know, and this was during the summer. I was going out running in the evening and I would come back in the twilight and I would come back along this stretch where these kids were and I would think there is some part of them that's still there. These kids had said in 1982, you know, they'd always felt they moved all around Glastonbury. They were part of that Beer Lane community. They always remained Beer Lane kids. And I thought again, just as I thought in 2003, when I'd been sitting at the back of this Glastonbury courtyard event, the 25th anniversary, somehow or another there is some consciousness, something requires there to be human awareness of this. And it was just absolutely sumptuous for me. Now the thing that's intriguing is that Powys, he lived in America, but he came back over in 1929 and he went extensively around Glastonbury to map out properly the topography of it. When you read the book, here and there it goes a bit wonky, but he will tell you where the characters are. They're walking up and down this road and along there, and you can follow it. And there's a lot of mention of the Abbey Barn, and there's a lot of mentions going up and down Beer Lane, and there's a particular bunch of children, young children, that feature as part of the narrative in the romance. One of them turns out to be the illegitimate child of Philip Crowe, but they're spirited urchins, and you know the dialect and the way he portrays it is just wonderful. And I thought to myself, what are the chances that Powys walked down Beer Lane and walked past the Abbey Barn and saw these kids during that period of time? He definitely walks up and down there, he did. What are the chances that he saw them? He's the kind of guy that notices absolutely flipping everything. You know, a tiny little bit of moss or a brick on a wall and he's going to notice it. When you read the book, you know, I'm sure many of you appreciate his grasp of the dialect and the nuances and everything in this is unparalleled. What are the chances that he saw those kids? I obviously would love to believe that he did. I would love to believe that he did. And that literally, you know, I essentially had entered into a missing segment of Glastonbury Romance, or the very substrata of that enormous thing that it is genuinely alive. Although these are fictional characters, although the guy's written it thousands of miles away across the ocean, You know, this was absolutely wonderful. So I told them, I couldn't help but tell some of my neighbours about it. And one of my neighbours, on the basis of that, at least at that period of time, planted some kidney beans in the front garden. So, you know, this bit of continuity, this bit of psychogeographical continuity came out of all of that. So that was just absolutely wonderful, absolutely wonderful. All this is in my Glastonbury Psychogeography, and I'm really glad that I wrote that entire book while I was living in that place. You know, in certain respects, it's almost my homage to the sensibilities that I engaged in while I was there, you know. More than sad to have to leave it. But it came out in April 2016, and an odd little episode in retrospect. It was literally a couple of days after I got it, and I was in Abbey Park with my kids, and I bumped into a guy called Dan Chalmers. Now, some of you are already cringing at the mere mention of his name, I'm sure, who used to work with me in the warehouse. He was one of my alleged staff. And every single one of us had him figured as a complete slimeball, and he was very, very difficult to get on with. But when you're forced to be in the company of somebody every flipping day, you somehow accommodate them. And there he was with his kids, and I don't know how the hell the conversation got going, that we started talking about James's murder, but it turns out that Dan was good mates with Keith Noonan, and he'd even written to him the old time that he was in jail, and that he was out now. You know, I mean, you can just stab somebody 15 times in the chest and kill them and leave them to rot till the maggots are falling through the ceiling, and you're still out of jail in barely 10 years. You know, that is your reality check these days. But that was a very strange conversation. So fast forward to 2019. I hear about the Thorn. I thought, okay, I'm going to go back into Glastonbury Romance. And I'm thinking that I'm doing it to relay the kind of stuff that I've talked about, that extended quote from Killing the Grail, etc. Then I see the news. You know, Dan Chalmers has been sent to prison. You know, he's installed these cameras that he can secretly view women. He's gone down for 4 months, he's on the sex offenders list. And I realise, you know, from the date that this has been reported, that it happened the previous day, that this has literally happened the goddamn day I've started reading Glastonbury Romance. Now, bear in mind that 15 years earlier, this whole thing had flipping ended, I thought, with Keith Noonan being sent off to court and sent to prison on the day that I finished it. The day that I flipping started again, 15 years later, that happens. How the heck? What? You know, no, I do not believe anyone can tell me how that works, all right? But what it said to me was, look man, this is not over yet, you know? And it's like we're saying novelistic, it's almost like another series, you know, a TV series. That was the season finale, and now we're back into the next series, and we're starting up again like Twin Peaks Return or something. All right, time has moved on, but you're dropped into the same space. I mean, I do tend to think every year I'm very conscious of March the 5th, and you know, sometimes I've met up with people, or I've encouraged people to be reading the first page of Glastonbury Romance at noon on March the 5th. I've posted on Facebook over the years that there's always a case if we're going into this year's Glastonbury Romance, what the hell's going to happen? But this really seen something, this really said to me, well. So Edward James, Edward James is a classic Powysian character. You know, this is a disgraced former mayor of Glastonbury, a man who's been involved in a massive, great financial fraud. The guy that he was working with committed suicide. You know, it's a big deal. He goes to prison. There's £20 million adrift somewhere along the line. It's an epic scenario. And obviously back in 2010, the week that he's arrested happens to be the week that the crown is decapitated from the Thorn originally. And that was a very strange night in Glasgow. You know, let's be clear about it. So I gathered a little bit of information. I'm not naming names here, but someone I knew, in fact, of the 3 examples I'm going to cite, 2 of them are actually here tonight. Someone I knew had this completely inexplicable projectile vomiting all night, didn't know what the hell was going it was all about no obvious cause of it, and at the end of it all, when discovering the turbulence of what happened, wondered. Someone else had got into a strangely emotional state and ended up curled up in a ball, sort of sobbing on the floor. Somebody else I knew just 2 doors down the road from me, not prone to such things, saw this female kind of ghost vision appear in his bedroom. Now the thing is, it's cause and effect. I mean, it's very difficult to pin this down. On any given night, somebody's probably projectile vomiting somewhere in Glastonbury. You know, somebody is probably curled up in a ball getting emotional. You know, somebody is seeing a vision of dead dudes or entities or whatever. It's difficult to kind of pin it down and say, okay, this is all part of that because it happened that night, but the flavour that it left behind, you know, I remember this. So this is what happens then, and now obviously now, you know, James has been through the mangle and he's come out and he's done this inexplicable thing, and now we've got this kind of later, you know, peddling back from that. Well, look, I've got a lovely new tree that I'm going to plant. Why, if that was always the case, he didn't say that in the first place before? He just happened to allow the old ones to just be rolled down into the brambles. I don't know. But if you're familiar with Powys and the way that he investigates the really dark, intense, weird, twisted psychologies and the motivations and the paradoxes of his characters, you know, one can only speculate as to what the hell's going on in that guy's head. But he's a classic Powys character. We should also be clear that, you know, there's a kind of family thing there that doesn't all hang together as one clear, you know, plot device that shows that it's a lot more complex than some simple melodrama, because one of his brothers does very well for the community in terms of what happens with the maypole that comes from Wearyall and so on. So that's kind of, you know, a sign. We've got the killing of the Grail drama, you know, we've got all of that going on, and James is right there in the middle of it. But I'd also like to point out something else that which I don't think is separate from this. And that's at the other end of Wearyall Hill, at the far end of Roman Way by Powys Bridge, we've had these travellers in their caravans in moderate amounts for a little while, and then there's this massive move made against them with all these stones put in place. And so now far more travellers have turned up, and there's a whole weird vibe there now. We've probably all seen this. We've probably maybe walked by it, driven by it in the daytime now. Because I sometimes work the twilight shift at Clark's warehouse, I have walked through that at 10:30 at night. You know, in other words, under the cover of darkness. And believe me, it's a totally different scene under the cover of darkness. It is a weird vibe for certain. Now, on the first occasion that I walked through this, the phrase dark Karnak came into my mind. It was as if some real weird, you know, enclosure has somehow asserted itself there. For example, on the main green, you've got the war memorial that was originally situated in the Moorlands factories and was later moved on out there because that was where the easy access was. And it's now got like a whole circle of trees around it, and it's like surrounded on most sides by these stones. And then you've got all this stuff up the avenue. It's a pretty damn weird vibe, man. And of course, it's right there by Powys Bridge. Now the thing about Powys is, you know, it's got these kind of associations. Oh yeah, this is where Arthur threw his sword in, but it's also vague. Nobody believes that. You know, there's no history in that. But let's not belittle the genius loci and the way the mythology of this place kind of hangs together. It's also interesting that in Glastonbury Romance, John Crow is completely hostile to legends, actually has a vision of a sword falling out of the sky from Powys Bridge into the River Brue. And he believes in the reality of that vision completely, and yet it doesn't stop him from, you know, essentially hating an awful lot about Glastonbury as well. You know, this is part of the nuance of Powys and the way that he doesn't, you know, simplistically portray his characters. But we've got this kind of mythology there, and, you know, from the time when I did the Glastonbury Zodiac Vision Quest, we ended up, after we'd been up all night, we'd already been at it more than 12 hours. I jumped into the Weir and Portsborough flights at midnight. We were just completely out of it in all normal terms when we worked our way under all of the bridges and did these visualisations. So when I came into that vicinity, I was quite nuanced with it. Now, we've also got a load of mythology. Remember, Bridesmaids not all that far away from that. And we can't say for certain. There are these stories, there's a bunch of women priestesses that were there when they were druids or whatever. But the chances are, because it sticks up out of the water, somebody's probably going to have been there pre-Roman, aren't they? And we know that the Celts were prone to leaving sword offerings, in rivers, and in pools. So it's a maybe, it's a nuance that maybe this, these little associations of chucking a sword into the river, brew, are a kind of maybe an echo. Now, if you think, how does that work? That's a bit, there's an awful lot of time that goes by between one and another of these. Let's remember the very, very resonant archaeological discovery at Canterbury Castle in 1998, which still surprises me not how many people seem to know about it, when a Bronze Age era male burial in what was fashioned into the form of a canoe was found right on the very edge of the hill, and the feet were pointing directly towards Glastonbury Tor. Now that makes it absolutely obvious that to those people at that period of time, Glastonbury Tor was a place where the dead went. And they went there in a boat, Now the thing about that is the later legends, the later mythology around Arthur exactly echoes that motif. Now, do I believe that any of the people who wrote the early romances knew anything about that? No. Do I believe that the monks that found whatever they found in the abbey necessarily knew about that? No, I don't. Do I believe that there's a great case to be made for saying there's a huge amount of intrigue and all kinds of malarkey going on with those bones in that grave for the sake of politics and for the sake of money? It's pretty obvious it probably was. And yet, the genius loci somehow steps in and subverts this, somehow gives us that. Now, I have the sense that down Pompali's way, down Bride's Mound, with this story, that there may be a little something there that is actually, calling out to us. And we've got all this turbulence. We think of Wearyall Hill, we think of the other end of it, we think of the Holy Thorn, and yet all of this stuff is essentially blown up at the same time. So there's an enormous potential picture of what's going on here. I'd suggest, maybe a few dousers, maybe a few people who like to think they're a bit psychic and visionary, go and have a look down the dark Carmack at 3 o'clock in the morning, man, and see what he's doing, because I don't think it's going to be particularly cool. I think maybe we want to know about it. So with all this in mind, we've got a meeting, I think in this very room on Monday to discuss the little matter of what's going down with the Holy Thorn. And, my own particular peculiar destiny is that I've got an important event in London that I've got to be part of, and the date keeps going back and forth. I may not even be able to be here for this, but I'm hoping that I've primed you all with the sense that this is going to be an absolutely classic Powysian event. There's an event in Glastonbury Romance where the mayor holds a meeting and he never even turns up for it because he's gone to sleep in a boat over in Wearyall. But every single other character in the whole book turns up, and there's just this amazing description, interaction of all these people that are packed under one roof and what's going on. But just think who is likely to turn up for this. Probably quite a few of you are going to turn up for it. You're going to have the full spectrum of different levels of belief in the Joseph Arimathea mythology and the Holy Thorn, and whether he came here and whether he didn't, and whether he had Jesus with him, or whether he had Mary with him, or whether he had Mary Magdalene here, or whether he settled here, or what happened. You're going to get people that believe all of that or none of it are all going to be here. You are going to have, a full spectrum of sexuality. You're going to have a full spectrum of people that have got all kinds of soap operas going on with each other. You're going to have visionaries, you're going to have UFO contactees, you're going to have people that believe there are fleets of flying saucers that are invisible, you know, the Ashtar Command and the Pleiadian light beings or whatever are just about to kick off here. You're going to have people that are into the hollow earth, you're going to have people that are into the flat earth, you're going to have maybe people that deny the Holocaust, you're going to have people that are into Brexit, that are not into Brexit, that love Trump, that hate Trump. You're going to have absolutely flipping everybody here. You're maybe going to have some Masons here, you're going to be some people who think the Masons are like Illuminati paedophiles. You're going to have all of this overstained by Her Majesty the Queen, who maybe is an extraterrestrial reptilian, or maybe isn't. You're going to have all of this, all in one room, all joined together by some people that have come to hear somebody talk about trade. You know, that's just basically. And Powys, you know, he has these wonderful scenes where he talks about gatherings of people, and that some, their thoughts rise up above them, and that they somehow, you know, cohere, and that they mix in with the more rarefied spiritual influences that are in play. Just imagine what the collective thoughts of this gathering on Monday are going to create around here. You know, and just imagine also the potential soap opera. You know, I invite you to partake of it thoroughly. The chances are there's going to be some raised voices. You know, some fingers will be pointed, some fists might be shaken. There may be, you know, things will get a bit emotional, a bit heated, but we don't know what's going to come out of it. It may be absolutely nothing useful on one level is going to come out of it at all. But what is going to happen is that you're going to have an absolutely classic episode, chapter of Glastonbury Romance 2019, played out par excellence. So I invite you, if you can be there, partake of this to the absolute max. Of course, you go in there because of the thorn, because of all of those issues. You know, join in, say whatever you want to say, be absolutely passionate, be engaged, but you already know that there's going to be a right old mix of people there. But become really, really conscious of that. You know, luxuriate in it. Absolutely love it, affirm it, and just see what on earth comes of it and what it is all going to be looking like in 6 months, 9 months, a year's time. And why it is that I've somehow been set up so readily to talk like this to you all tonight is an infinite mystery, but I have loved it, and I hope that you have taken something from it as well. Most of what I've said is all in my book, Glastonbury Psychogeography. Got a couple of them here, it's normally 12 quid, a mere £10 tonight. I will be over at the pub and I'm quite happy to engage in conversation with you all, but for now, no.